Hi there. This is a realistic DevOps interview focused on disaster recovery scenarios, the kind of conversation you get when an interviewer wants to know how you think when things go very wrong, not when everything is working. I will ask a question, then give a strong sample answer after. Before you listen to the answer, pause the video and say your own response out loud. Treat it like a real interview. If this style is useful to you, subscribe so you do not miss the next one. Let's start simple. Tell me about a time you were involved in a major outage or data loss incident. What was your role? A strong answer here would sound reflective and grounded. I would explain the context briefly, then focus on my responsibility. For example, I was on call when a storage misconfiguration caused a partial data loss in one region. My role was not to fix everything alone, but to stabilize the system, coordinate with the database team, and make sure communication stayed clear. I would highlight that I focused on reducing blast radius first, then recovery, then documentation. I would avoid blaming tools or people and instead show that I understand shared responsibility during incidents. Next question. How do you stay calm and effective when systems are down and stakeholders are escalating? A good answer shows self-awareness. I would say that pressure is expected during incidents, so I rely on structure. I slow myself down by following a runbook or checklist, even if it is imperfect. I prioritize facts over assumptions, and I communicate early, even if I do not have full answers yet. I have learned that calm communication often reduces pressure more than fast fixes. That mindset keeps me effective. Another one. Have you ever disagreed with leadership during an incident or recovery plan? How did you handle it? Here, I would show maturity. I might say that yes, I have disagreed when a proposed shortcut increased risk. I handled it by explaining trade-offs clearly, not emotionally. I framed my concern around customer impact and long-term reliability, not personal preference. Even if the final decision went against my suggestion, I made sure the risks were documented so we could learn from the outcome later. One more. What does ownership mean to you during and after an incident? A strong candidate would say that ownership does not end when the service is back up. During the incident, ownership means staying engaged until stability is confirmed. Afterward, it means participating in the post-incident review, helping improve runbooks, and closing the gaps that allowed the failure. Ownership is about follow-through, not heroics. Now let's move into disaster recovery. First question. When you hear disaster recovery, what does it actually mean in practice beyond backups? I would start by saying disaster recovery is about restoring business capability, not just restoring data. Backups are necessary, but not sufficient. In practice, DR includes recovery time objectives, recovery point objectives, infrastructure readiness, access controls, and tested procedures. It also includes people knowing their roles. A backup that has never been restored is just an assumption. Real DR means you can confidently say how long recovery will take and what data you might lose. Next scenario. Your primary region goes down completely. Traffic is failing. Where do you start? I would explain my thinking step by step. First, I confirm the scope. Is it truly a regional failure or a dependency issue? Then, I decide whether this is a failover or fail-fast situation. If we have a secondary region prepared, I would focus on traffic routing and DNS, or load balancer changes. At the same time, I would freeze non-essential changes and communicate clearly to stakeholders. I would not try to fix the primary region immediately if failover is faster and safer. Another question, how do you decide between active-active and active-passive disaster recovery designs? I would answer by grounding it in business needs. Active-active improves availability and recovery time, but increases complexity and cost. Active-passive is simpler and cheaper, but slower to recover. The decision depends on tolerance for downtime, data consistency requirements, and team maturity. I would say there is no universally correct choice. I look for the simplest design that meets the business risk profile. Next one. What are common mistakes teams make with disaster recovery planning? I would mention a few patterns, but explain them naturally. Teams often focus only on infrastructure and ignore data consistency. They assume backups work without testing restores. They underestimate dependencies like identity systems or third-party APIs. And they forget human factors, like who has access during an emergency. The biggest mistake is treating DR as documentation instead of a practiced capability. Final question for this section. How often should disaster recovery be tested, and what does a good test look like? I would say that frequency depends on system criticality, but testing should be regular and intentional. A good test is not a checkbox. It simulates real conditions, includes people who would actually respond, and allows failures to happen safely. The goal is learning, not proving perfection. If a test feels uncomfortable, it is probably valuable. Pause here. In the next part, the questions get harder and more ambiguous, closer to what you would hear in a senior-level interview. Let's continue. Imagine you discover that your backups are technically succeeding, but restores take hours longer than your recovery time objective. What do you do next? A strong answer would start by separating backup success from recovery success. I would say that this is already a failed disaster recovery setup, even if no outage has happened yet. My next step would be to understand why restores are slow. Is it data volume, network throughput, encryption overhead, or dependency ordering? From there, I would look at options like incremental restores, tiered backups, or pre-warmed standby systems. I would also revisit the RTO itself and confirm whether it was realistic to begin with. Sometimes the fix is technical. Sometimes the fix is aligning expectations with reality. Next scenario. Your application depends on a third-party service that has no strong availability guarantees. How does that change your disaster recovery strategy? Here, I would explain that disaster recovery is not just about your own systems. If a critical dependency goes down, failing over regions might not help at all. In this case, I would think about isolation first. Can we degrade gracefully if that service is unavailable? Can we cache responses, queue requests, or provide a reduced experience? I would also look at whether we need a secondary provider or a manual fallback process. The key idea is that DR planning must include external dependencies. Otherwise, it creates a false sense of safety. Another question. How do you handle data consistency during regional failover, especially for databases that are not globally consistent? I would answer this carefully and honestly. There is always a trade-off between consistency and availability. During a regional failover, I would first decide whether the system should prioritize correctness or uptime. For some systems, serving stale or partially inconsistent data is acceptable. For others, it is not. I would explain that we usually accept some data loss defined by the recovery point objective, but we must be explicit about it. Technically, this might involve promoting replicas, freezing writes, or reconciling data after recovery. The most important part is that this behavior is understood and documented before an incident. Next one. Have you ever had to choose between a fast but risky recovery and a slower but safer one? How would you decide in the moment? A mature answer would acknowledge that this happens often. I would say that in the moment, I assess customer impact, reversibility, and blast radius. A fast recovery that can be rolled back safely is often acceptable. A fast recovery that could corrupt data permanently is not. I also consider who is awake, what expertise is available, and how confident we are in the change. Sometimes the correct decision is to slow down, communicate clearly, and accept downtime to protect long-term integrity. Next scenario. Your failover process itself fails during a real outage. What does that tell you, and how do you respond? I would say that this tells me the failover process was either too complex, insufficiently tested, or dependent on assumptions that did not hold. In the moment, I would switch to manual recovery steps if possible, and focus on restoring partial service rather than perfect service. After the incident, I would treat this as a serious learning opportunity. A failed failover is often more valuable than a successful test because it reveals hidden coupling and operational gaps. Final question in this section. How do you balance the cost of disaster recovery against the likelihood of a disaster actually happening? I would explain that this is ultimately a risk management conversation. Not every system needs multi-region replication and instant recovery. I balance cost by matching investment to impact. Systems that affect revenue or safety get stronger guarantees. Internal tools may accept more downtime. I also look for designs that reduce risk without doubling cost, like simpler architectures or better observability. Disaster recovery is not about eliminating risk. It is about choosing which risks you are willing to live with. Take a moment here. In the next section, the questions shift from technical depth to judgment under pressure, where there are no clean answers and trade-offs become very uncomfortable. Let's move into the final set of questions. These are intentionally uncomfortable. There is rarely a perfect answer here. What matters is how you think when the system is already on fire. First scenario. A major outage hits during peak business hours. You can either initiate a regional failover now with limited testing, or wait another 30 minutes to validate data integrity and reduce risk. Leadership is asking for an immediate decision. What do you do? A strong answer would acknowledge the tension instead of trying to sound decisive too quickly. I would say that my first step is to understand customer impact in real time. Are users completely blocked, or is the experience degraded? If users are fully blocked and revenue impact is severe, I would lean toward initiating the failover while clearly communicating the risk. If users can still perform critical actions, I might buy time to validate the recovery path. I would also involve a second senior engineer to sanity check the decision. This is not about heroics. It is about minimizing irreversible damage while restoring value as fast as possible. Next question. After a disaster recovery event, you discover that a small amount of customer data was lost, but leadership wants to downplay it to avoid reputational risk. How do you handle this? I would answer this carefully and firmly. I would say that transparency matters more than short-term comfort. I would push to accurately describe what was lost, who was affected, and what the long-term implications are. I would also advocate for notifying customers in a clear and honest way, even if it is uncomfortable. From an engineering perspective, hiding data loss almost always leads to worse outcomes later. Trust is much harder to recover than systems. Another scenario. You are on call and woken up for a suspected disaster recovery situation. The signals are noisy and incomplete. Some dashboards look fine, others do not. Do you escalate immediately or wait for clarity? A mature response would show restraint. I would say that I try to gather just enough information to determine if this is a real incident or a false alarm. I look for customer-facing impact first. If there is credible impact, I escalate early, even if I do not have full clarity. If the impact is unclear, I may wait a few minutes to confirm trends. The key is to avoid two extremes. Panicking too early causes alert fatigue. Waiting too long increases damage. I also document what I see as I go so decisions are traceable later. Next one. A full disaster recovery test has been postponed multiple times due to business pressure. An outage has not happened yet, but you know the system is unproven. How do you address this? I would explain that this is a leadership and risk conversation, not just a technical one. I would quantify the risk in plain language. What happens if this fails during a real outage? How long would recovery take? What would customers experience? I would then propose a smaller scope test if a full test is not acceptable. Partial validation is better than none. If the risk is severe enough, I would be willing to escalate and document my concerns clearly. Silence is a form of acceptance. Final pressure question. During a disaster, two senior engineers disagree strongly on the recovery approach. Both options have risks. How do you move forward? Here, I would focus on decision ownership. I would say that disagreements are normal under stress. The priority is to avoid paralysis. I would listen to both viewpoints, ask which risks are reversible, and choose the path that minimizes long-term harm. Once a decision is made, I would align the team behind it and execute cleanly. After the incident, the disagreement becomes valuable learning. During the incident, unity matters more than being right. Take a breath here. If you made it through this interview, you probably noticed something. Disaster recovery is not just about backups and regions. It is about judgment under uncertainty. It is about communication. It is about choosing imperfect options when time is working against you. Go back and think about which question felt hardest to answer. Was it the technical trade-offs, the leadership pressure, or the ethical tension around data loss and transparency? If you are preparing for real interviews, pause the video and answer these questions out loud. Pay attention to how you explain your thinking, not just what decision you land on. That is what interviewers listen for. If this format helped you, subscribe so you do not miss the next interview in this series. And if you want, drop a comment sharing which scenario challenged you the most and why.